Rants with Jason Bermas. We're on Red Voice Media. First hour is always going to be free sauce across platforms. You want to come over for the second hour, you don't want to pay, that's okay. We're over on Podbean as well, and that's how you can call into the broadcast. Really great show for you today. I'm going to be having Johnny Vedmore on in about 30 minutes, so you're going to have to bridge the gap here. If you can stand just having a little bit of Vedmore, as we break down the Kissinger Continuum, the unauthorized history of the WEF's Young Global Leaders program. And if you think that this is all going to be Klaus Schwab and even Henry Kissinger, newsflash, nope. Tons of other stuff in here. The OSS, the CIA, all right? Coups backed by Kermit Roosevelt and others. This was just an amazing piece. Harvard and the integration there, the creation of Israel, the wedge point that got the Arab League to leave the United States. So many things, so many aspects that are so important before you get to the end of the article and you actually start talking about those that have penetrated the cabinets, as they say, before you get to the Tony Blairs and the Merkels and the Gordon Browns of the world. So I was originally going to have Vedmore on to talk about two separate articles. Here's the thing. Every time me and this guy talk, it ends up going well over an hour. So second hour is going to be the second half of that conversation. We'll see how long Johnny stays, an hour, maybe even more. We've been known that to do that together, but then maybe we'll both take some calls at the end. Now, the last time I had him on, we were talking about some of Klaus Schwab's mentors, Kissinger among them. And Kissinger is somebody I focused on heavily in my film Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, because he was really, and still is, a driving force for global governance and these front groups. Okay, and there's some other front groups we're going to be talking about with the Central Intelligence Agency, with his Harvard summer school program and some forums that he was having there that led to this Young Global Leaders Initiative. That's all important stuff. Kissinger was really kind of this disciple of this Rockefeller ideal set. Rockefeller funding a lot of this, and Rockefeller actually really being impressed with Henry Kissinger when he met him where? Bilderberg. The Bilderberg Group. I've seen these fact checks and these debunks. There's no such thing as the Bilderberg Group. It's a meeting. There's a Bilderberg meeting. Up is down and down is up. The sky is not blue. It is falling. Okay? Kissinger and Rockefeller. Kissinger still goes. Henry still goes. And Rockefeller went up right into the twilight of his life. I think he went like when he was 99 years old. And I think Kissinger right now is 99 years old. And for me, that's one of these meetings, right, that is at the apex of the management of the year. Okay? What is the goal set that we're trying to bring into fruition over the next 12 months? It's really 12 to 36 months. You see something like the post-truth world where they're discussing it in 2018, and then they implement the post-truth world in about 2020. No big deal. We talk about it a lot. Kind of important, right? So Kissinger, we talk about him in this, and the idea of the creation of this World Economic Forum, again, a mouthpiece for the agenda. Kissinger was just one of several of the people that mentored Klaus Schwab, the Harvard/CIA goon. At least that's what Vedmore presents, and Vedmore does a great job of presenting that evidence. Herman Kahn and J.K. Galbraith are the other two people that he highlights in his last article dealing with this. And by the way, unlimited Hangout, Johnny Vedmore, Whitney Webb, it doesn't get much better than this, okay? Now, this isn't a BuzzFeed article or a Babylon Bee satire piece or something you're going to run through in 5 or 10 minutes. If you really want to read something like this and understand it, you've got to dedicate a good half hour to really 2 hours if you want to look up some of the stuff that is discussed in depth. For instance, when we're talking about coup d'etats, talks about Operation Ajax and the CIA, and Iran. And this is something that cannot be really understated, that there were so many covert coups. We only have seen a small glimpse into what the CIA was actually involved with via that period, okay, of the Dulles brothers, for instance. I want you to think about that. This is an organization that comes out of World War II. I believe it's 1948 that the CIA becomes official. And that organization, from 1948, it only took 15 short years to kill a president. There's a broad daylight, just kill a president. And you know what went through my mind while I was thinking that? I'm thinking to myself, you know, that's pretty dangerous. The CIA has only gotten more and more dangerous over the years. But what came into my head was the Department of Homeland Security, and how the Department of Homeland Security is actually older than that and almost on its 20th birthday at this point, 2003, right? We're about to be in 2023 like that before you know it. And how much power they have amassed, and how they have openly turned their apparatus inward at the citizenry. Always built for the citizenry. Wasn't built to get the bad brown men over in the other countries. Oh, they're so bad. Oh, they're so dangerous. Oh, extremism. No. Set up for you and me and people that would speak out against this system, because at the end of the day, what was the CIA pushing? They were pushing globalism. They were pushing globalism. Even when the vast majority of it was utilizing people that had been scared by communism, right? A lot of people that were involved in this thought they were fighting the good fight and that they had to do these things because the big bad communists were the enemy. And that gets into kind of this wedge and perpetual war issue in the Middle East, which it looks like the Central Intelligence Agency is not only able to utilize, but essentially create, right? They paint one narrative, and then the evidence shows you something completely different. And that wedge issue would be Israel and the Palestinian conflict. And by having people inside that were vehemently pro-Israel and vehemently anti-Zionist, especially at that time period, Franklin Roosevelt amongst those who was not favorable towards Israel, right? You have that conflict. It sets the path that, for instance, later on during the Cold War, you can utilize your intelligence networks that you've set up throughout the Middle East because you've couped a bunch of nations, right? It talks more about than just the coup in Iran. We're talking about Egypt in here, you know, setting up their intelligence apparatus. Similar things were done in Pakistan. And then when it was time to battle the big, bad, evil Russians, and this article really doesn't get into any of this, there were certain alliances with bin Laden and the Mujahideen, right, and the ISI, that you could use them in your little proxy wars with Russia. And in fact, you could set up the attacks that would goad Russia into that physical conflict. Then you make movies like Rambo, right, and call them freedom fighters. And the Russians are still bad, bad, bad because you make movies like Rocky, and if I can change, and you could change, we all could change, right? See how movies work and culture? When they were getting ready to pass the buck back to the Arabs and the Middle Easterners, right? They make it so Drago and Rocky have a moment, right? The Soviet Union's about to collapse. Communism's going to be over. And then movies like True Lies are made, where it's Libyan terrorists, right? It's Middle Eastern terrorists. Oh, yes. And hey, True Lies, fun movie. Rocky's fun movie. Rambo 3, fun movie. But if you don't think that those narratives are ultimately put out there as a way to manage public sentiment. It's a type of psychological warfare. You're not paying attention. So I have this clip, and it is of Herman Kahn, who is one of the people that Stanley Kubrick, one of my favorite filmmakers, talk about peeling an onion, right? Talk about layer upon layer upon layer. Talk about subliminals and messages. Can't get enough of that wonderful stuff that Stanley Kubrick did. Now, Dr. Strangelove stands up to this day. What a film. Amazing. Fantastic. Poignant. Okay? Still relevant. Still overtly relevant. And Dr. Strangelove, the Peter Sellers character, Sellers plays several people in the film. Bang up job. Is partially based on this character called Herman Kahn. And it was only after I read Vedmore's first article on this, those people that had mentored Klaus Schwab, that I really looked into Kahn. I found some interesting videos of him. He was really jovial and jolly and somebody you wanted to like, right? Almost like a younger version of Santa Claus mixed in with a Henry Kissinger that wasn't hell-bent on death and destruction all the time. And he had one of the more measured views of nuclear war, actually. And again, these issues are poignant because we're talking about World War III right now. We're talking about strategical nukes. Not enough people are talking about it like it's a real thing while you got a zombie poopy pants puppet in office. It's a big deal. But he's the guy that came up with MAD, or mutually assured destruction. Let me repeat that. Mutually assured destruction. He said, you know what? It's actually probably better that several nations, if not the majority of nations, actually have nuclear weapons. Why? Because most nation states are going to be smarter, if not all, than to F around and find out. Because to F around and find out means their destruction. Mutually assured destruction. Something you actually learn about as a kid. At least I did, coming up at the end of that Cold War era where I was still doing duck and cover drills, right? Where they were putting out films like The Day After Tomorrow. So, mutually assured destruction. Wow. And I watched several videos and debates with this guy. One of the clips I found, several minutes long, we're going to play it next. And we're about 15 minutes away from Johnny Vedmore joining me to go over the Kissinger Continuing the Unauthorized History of the WEF's Young Global Leaders Program. Boy, again, these things are really essays, and they're fantastic, and they're well-sourced. There is this video of Herman Kahn at the Hudson Institute. Now, remember, he's not totally Dr. Strangelove. That's not the whole character, right? It was based on several different people. But he is this person that, in this instance, is putting out some pretty severe utopian/dystopian nightmare scenarios. And the Hudson Institute is one of these think tanks. And there's so many of these think tanks that gets a seat at the table. What do you mean a seat at the table? Guess what? They were at Bilderberg 2022. And they're often at Bilderberg. Just like the Carnegie Endowment is there. Just like Goldman Sachs is there, right? Just like Raytheon representatives are there. So that's why Bilderberg is so important, because it's still this Anglo-American power structure within the military-industrial complex, which is also the media military-industrial complex, and their cohorts. That's why media is there. That's why guys like Jan LeCun, who are doing what? I believe it's AI in the metaverse. That's why they're there, right? We played the Springmeyer and, right, Axel. Is it Axel Springmeyer? The Axel guy who was talking to Musk. He's another one of those guys. But this one, they're talking about a futuristic society where you're just drugged and tested. Let me repeat that. The peasant class, you. That's one of the reasons I actually like Kahn. Not only because he's kind of funny, but he lays it out there on what these people at the top, the predator class, think of you. You're the peasant class. And we will do with you as we wilt. So let's play this clip. right here of Herman Kahn, Hudson Institute, way back in the Dizzy, still relevant today.
30 miles north of New York City, the problems of our violent age are pondered over in one of America's most influential think tanks, the Hudson Institute. In this 19th century mansion, they are looking for alternative futures, both utopian and dystopian.
It is the BBC, and they are in a mansion.
The end product of this think tank, scenarios, scripts for the 21st century.
Let's admit that the affluence, the skills, the technology will really make life better in all kinds of ways. Mm-hmm. But, we also know these things go badly.
Look at that little smirk. Now, I don't know if you've seen Alex Jones's new look. It's kind of like Amish chic. He's got the beard. He's got the trim mustache. Herman Kahn also took that look at some time after this. But he's right. Technology has made things better. It's a tool that can empower. For instance, there's no way 10 years ago, when I was kind of almost at the end of my talk radio / web TV show career, that I could do this out of a spare room in my house. And right now I'm on 5 separate platforms. I'm on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, Twitter, and Podbean. Rumble twice, okay, because we're also over at Red Voice Media. All out of my house. Now, I've got a producer on the other end doing 2 of those things. I could still be doing at least one of those things, and really I could probably be doing both. I'm in 1080p. I'm able to broadcast worldwide, not just locally, worldwide with my message, and just about anybody with a link can tune in. That's huge. Would not been able to do that for 10 years ago. However, the censorship is massive, where there are certain subjects I can't talk about on the biggest platform out there, but they're a for-profit organization, Jason. They're traded on the stock market. If you don't like it, you just get out. YouTube doesn't turn a profit. I saw Barack Obama talking about this whole thing. Oh, social media, they love to make people clash. They love to promote all that. Right? Because they're for profit. YouTube doesn't make any money, honey. They're another mouthpiece of this great narrative, and that's what they're there for. Okay? And to fool you into thinking there's some kind of a private company or private organization. If you don't understand that the Central Intelligence Agency through InQtel funded what Google would become, and that Google is a massive military industrial complex contractor, you ain't paying attention. You ain't paying attention at all. But you know what? Let's get to Mr. Kahn talking about things possibly going badly with technology.
Right. Okay, everybody's worried about the possibilities of various kinds of social controls and so on. What would the scenario be?
Herman Kahn is director of the Institute, Tony Weiner his assistant.
It has to involve the social controls coming into effect gradually and slowly, and at each step as a result of some decision which seems to be very much in the general interest. That is no imposition by an evilly intended big brother.
So, in other words, incrementalism. Problem, reaction, solution. Let's take our time. Let's make sure there's some kind of threat we got to save you from. We'll come in with that solution. We don't want you to think that it's nefarious at all. It's nefarious.
How are we going to achieve a utopian peace in our cities, even without the bomb? What is the scenario for a utopian peace?
Now, here's the scenario for not dystopian, a utopian peace.
To take a Black Power movement, right, and one which really is trying to cause problems, to put sand in the gears.
Right.
And you've already set up a good deal of this social watching. Mm-hmm. You've got your TV cameras everywhere, you've got your data processing, everybody has his ID card, you've double-checked it. Mm-hmm. And now, all of a sudden, you've got these guys that are throwing sand in the gears, and you clamp down. That is, you keep track of every car. You keep track of this is easy to do.
decades before the Track Trace Database Society would be instituted, right? And this is pre 9/11. This is Norris Insight Systems. This is Carnivore. This is Promise, right? This is Central Intelligence Agency, NSA type of stuff. He was wargaming it. He was wargaming it. He's talking about a society where everybody's got their ID cards, where the CCTV cameras are everywhere, where the data processing moves like that, moves like that, moves like that. Think about how much this magic box gives up every day about you. But here's where it gets ultra fun.
You keep track of 10% or 100% of the conversation that occurs on telephones.
One could, with a computer capacity that will be available in the next couple of decades, one could easily record every phone conversation made. And then one could easily scan mechanically. No human being could spend the centuries that would be required. One could scan every conversation looking for keywords that would identify the conversation as worth looking into a little further.
That's exactly what Norris was. Okay, again, just taking massive amounts of data, looking for that keywords via software, Carnivore and Promise, like I talked about. At least that's what we know about it. I'm sure there was a ton more. Later on, you'd find out about X-Keyscore and others with the Vault 7 dump, okay, going on way before 9/11 and after. All right? And these guys are putting it out decades before. That's how you create a utopian society. Oh.
So that, for example, one could begin with a naive set of words. Kill, rob, murder, assassinate, plot, conspire.
You know, you can do more than that. You could imagine temporarily tranquilizing a whole city.
Oh, even more than that, we just tranquilize a whole city. Now think about what the implementation of something like smart drugs, where con scenario seems outdated. And that's what's also being pushed by the World Economic Forum. When they talk about when humans become cyborgs, when they talk about the fourth industrial revolution, when we talk about the internet of bodies. But just, again, utopian society. Here we go, Mr. Khan. He's loving the smiles.
You know, it's been upset, been riots. You know, let's put transcorders either in the air or in the water. You know, just get people settled down a bit. I can imagine you could do preventive medicine going on in this kind of state.
Yeah, some preventative medicine in this state. You know, we'll put it in the air or in the water. We're not going to let anybody know. And remember, they actually did these type of things to people. 100% they did these type of things to people via the cadmium sulfite and others and other programs, right? We were talking about the Department of Energy the other day. We have the document. We have the documents, folks. We've shown you the documents. Let's let Khan finish up, and Vedmore should be here within the next 10 minutes. I'm very excited to be talking about this article.
You know, where you really check up with everybody and to see that they keep their drug levels right.
Oh,
Yes.
In fact, the first thing you do when you go into to work is they punch you and check your blood and see that the drug level is what it's supposed to be.
don't even need to do that anymore with the smart drugs. Nope. Much easier. By the way, over on YouTube, not even 100 likes, guys. Come on. It's the morning show. We're on Reality Rants.
So you'll buy the safety of your city at the expense of the privacy of individuals. And for most people, most of the time, the intrusion will not be the kind of thing they'd be conscious of.
So the scenario for a utopia without violence is achieved at the expense of your private life.
You're damn right it is. You're damn right it is. And these are the type of things that guys like Khan, who, oh, look at that. Whoa, what happened? That guys like Khan war game all the time. All right. And Herman Khan is a long list of these people. And he might actually be one of the more reasonable guys. I mean, can you imagine the things that John Podesta talks about behind closed doors? Skippy, the old Skipster, a guy who was just brought in to the Biden administration, all right, that's been around for decade upon decade. A guy that in Earth 2100, I believe it is, he's the one promoting the climate fear agenda. I mean, we've played Earth 2100. Maybe we should bring that up and that predictive programming, because he was part of all sorts of war games, John Podesta. He was also in that really interesting war game where they were wargaming the 2020 elections and how if Trump, came in the winner at the beginning, they could do all these other types of things and ensure their victory. Remember that, John? John Skippy Podesta. We love Skip. Let's see if we can bring this up, actually. We do it live. Let's see if Earth 2100. There it is. The Earth 2100, okay? So, if you guys haven't seen this, and I would imagine a lot of my newer audience has not seen this, this is something that was put out in 2008 or 2009. It has players such as Van Jones, Bezos' $10 million man in it, James Woolsey of the CIA. We're going to be talking a lot of CIA with Johnny Vedmore, all right? Then you also have guys like Eric Schmidt, who headed up Google in this. Oh, Tony Fauci's in it. Tony Fauci's in it. It's all about how we're bad and our standard of living is going to plummet and disease and pestilence is going to take over the earth. Why? Climate change, of course. And just look at what they've got in the very beginning of this.
In my life, I've seen New York City under full quarantine.
Oh!
The Midwest overrun, devastated by pests. Plague sweep across California.
Look at that. 2009. They saw New York down by full quarantine. Everybody's got a mask on. Huh. And, I'm just going to scroll through this. And they making this little cartoon thing, right? And the authoritative sources, they got like this cartoon. There he is. There's old Skip. Let's go back to the Skip. Skippy Podesta. He comes back in. There's some Barack Star. Oh, there's Van Jones. There he is. There's the dude. Some great guy. And this stuff is really cartoon level, folks. That's the funny thing about it. Basically, progressively, the world is a more and more terrible place, right? Oh, there's gas shortages. We don't know what to do. There's going to be refugee camps. There's going to be great floods. Everything is blamed on climate change. Is that Howard Zinn? No. I was going to say he looks like Howard Zinn. There's Skippy in one of his war games. Here it is. Here are the type of thing. But this is like the public thing. What do they say behind closed doors? That's the real question. Well, you and I, we're not really privy to most of that. There's the frog boiling in the pot of water. See how they use that also? All the fear-mongering's here. Earth 2100, a special environmental event. I mean, you look at this, you're going to be born into poverty. You've ruined the planet. Carbon is taken over. And that's one of the things that's so crazy about this. These young global leaders that are being brought up are really being brought up through this thought process and ideology that is nothing more than scarcity. And it's artificial scarcity. It's not real scarcity, right? Same thing as planned obsolescence, only they might not be aware because they're not that bright. Some of them are very much aware. If you don't think a guy like Henry Kissinger knows what's going on for real, you're not paying attention. Henry Kissinger damn well knows what's going on for real. So, Johnny Vedmore should be joining us momentarily. Oh, there it is. Yep. I'm going to give him the, actually, he's got the link. He'll be fine. He'll jump in. While we're doing this, I want to read maybe the beginning of this article for the audience. The Kissinger Continuum, the unauthorized history of the WEF's Young Global Leaders Program, the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program, Klaus Schwab's supposed brainchild, is actually an almost exact replica of Henry Kissinger's international seminar that was originally run out of Harvard and was funded by the CIA. In this article, Johnny Vedmore investigates the people behind Kissinger's international seminar, the CIA conduits which funded the program, and Kissinger's key role in the creation of the WEF's Young Global Leaders Program itself. And with that, we are connecting to the one and only Johnny Vedmore of Unlimited Hangout. You know, Johnny, I thought that we might be doing both of those issues, 1 and 2. We're going to stick to 1. You did a bang-up job on this piece, and there's just so much involvement here. Yes, absolutely. So let's get to some of that. Let's talk about the fact that you came into this. You know, a lot of people think they're going to be reading about Klaus Schwab, and they're going to be talking about all these global leaders. That's really at the end, because the genesis of this program is post-World War II, as much of the modern-day media military industrial complex and these kind of roundtable groups and institutes and think tanks come out of. And you talk about the fact that Harvard has been kind of set up as this CIA front for a lot of these agendas. And it was in the summer of the late 40s and early 50s where they saw a guy like Henry Kissinger, who was getting his bachelor in political science, I believe it was at the time. And he gets his bachelor there, and all of a sudden he's got a publication there that's run by the Rockefellers. And all of a sudden he's got these summer seminars that are extremely reminiscent of what will grow into being these World Economic Forum Young Global Leader groups. So, Johnny, first of all, introduce yourself to my audience over at Red Voice Media. Tell people how you got started, and then let's just kick into it.
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Jason. Man, and lots of your people who are watching you, they know me a little bit. And that's partially because you gave me the ability to get out there in the first place. I mean, I was really heavily censored. My first piece was like pieces that I wrote that was kind of like entering into the world of intelligence and looking at intelligence operations, was looking at Nicole Junkermann, a German Epstein associate who had like about a 17, 18, 19-year relationship business-wise with Epstein and intelligence-wise. And I was completely, I mean, she basically obliterated my name off the internet. She systematically had people going through, who contacted me, people who going through the internet and looking for my name and her name and having me taken down. And I was being systematically censored. And there was a very few platforms, like a handful free, right at the start, including yourself, who actually gave me the ability to speak out. So I've been doing this now since probably about, I went into journalism about 2016, where I was like, I couldn't take it anymore. You know, you keep reading and reading and reading, and you're like, oh God, why isn't anybody talking about the things that I see here or the things I see there? And, you know, whenever there's a laziness in the world where people want to know about something, so they go and they look for somebody who's talking about it. And I was always someone who was like, I want to look deep into finding other things about them. And I always thought at the start, when I first started investigating, was even earlier than that, I started investigating things like the Epstein case around 2011. And I discovered that you know, that I suddenly knew information that no one knew. You know, it was a really weird experience. I wasn't a trained journalist. I failed at nearly every school and college education, full stop. I just could not. I was not fit for the establishment's version of education.
Well, let's stop right there, because it's so important, because there's so many people out there that digest information from Bernaysian talking points, headlines of articles they don't even read. And then when they read the articles, there's usually some spin in there or some purposeful misdirection. Let's say that, some narrative control. There's nothing like reading the actual documents. So in the case of Epstein, you know, one of the reasons that I think that I had a large growth in that period was I was one of the only people that was going through the PDF files and court documents that were continually being released via lawsuits prior to his arrest. A lot of people forget about that portion of the story. But from about 2015 to 2017, while New York was apparently putting their case together, there was a slew of documents starting to be released. And like you said, the mainstream media still wasn't covering a case they hadn't covered for over a decade. I am the guy, just like you're the guy, that's going to sit down and watch a 4-hour World Economic Forum video on C-SPAN to maybe get 30 seconds or 5 minutes of clips or quotes that you're going to put into a story. But it's so essential. Look at TrueStream Media and their recent King of the World documentary. Having to sit through Prince Charles talking to WEF on the 50, that's got to be tough. But at the same time, I'm glad they did it, because they were pointing out things that nobody else does. And you guys over at Unlimited Hangout are like champions of that. You're top tier, and this article proves it. So let's start, I guess, with why you chose that time period of the late 40s and early 50s to really emphasize in the first half of your article, because we also kind of get into not only the CIA and the coup d'etats that they're carrying out in the Middle East, but how there was this wedge issue via the creation of Israel that sets up a state for perpetual war, and basically a system in which you could bounce in and out of at almost any given moment.
Yeah. But I mean, I started off with, as you know, I started off with looking into Klaus Schwab's ancestry, discovering his father worked for a model Nazi company, discovering lots of things about him that, of course, had been hidden from by the mainstream, you could say. And then last time I was on here, we talked about the second part of that article, the second in that series, where basically he is at this course in Harvard, Kissinger's international seminar. He arrives in about 1965. It's part of the summer school. So it was like, where all the students go away, in come these guys who are going to be trained by Kissinger as young global leaders, as we'll see with this. And in 1967, he graduates from that, and he goes back to Germany. And he gets given two really important influences, mentors, John Kenneth Galbraith, who's serious economic master, Keynesian economics. He's got an amazing history, CFR, of course, lots of deep connections. And Herman Kahn, the guy who's classed as a real Dr. Strangelove in many corners, argued in other corners. And he was the guy who wrote On Thermonuclear War and really put an end to the mutually assured destruction idea. And we'll get on to that in a little bit, I think, a little parts of that. And that led me to realize, right, okay, this course, Kissinger's International Seminar, is extremely interesting. It's extremely important in the history of the world. So it's not only just people like Klaus Schwab, Pierre Trudeau, D'Estaing, who is a French president later on, who go through this course. There's lots of different people who go through this course, and this course was set up by some really interesting people. So I went back. I said, "There's information there that really needs to be sifted through. I really need to look at that course in full." And so I went back, and in this article, I went back to 1950 and the graduation of Kissinger first. And Kissinger graduates, as you say. He's seen as the next big thing by the people on the ground in Harvard. He has written the biggest dissertation in history, in Harvard's history. He's producing work after work after work, and he wants to go work for the FBI. And it's McGeorge Bundy, who's a really influential character too, who says, no, you should go work for the CFR. And he's nominated for the CFR, gets into the CFR, and starts wargaming out nuclear strategy and nuclear war games in the same way that Herman Kahn would be doing with the Rand Institute, with Rand Corporation and the Hudson Institute a little bit later, is why they align. And my thought was, right, okay, so where did this course come from? Why did the international seminar get set up? Who's funding the international seminar? Because as I revealed in the second piece, in 1967, it was reported by the New York Times and Harvard Crimson themselves that the Kissinger's international seminar was funded by at least 3 CIA conduits. In 1967, they admitted, I know, it's just mind-blowing, they admitted that between 1960 and 1966, they don't tell you the funding between 1950 and 1960, because that's serious funding. That's still hidden. That's still a hidden history. But they show that it's funded by the American Friends of the Middle East, by the Farfield Foundation, and by the Asian Foundation. And these guys are all CIA conduits. These are just, I mean, it's just unbelievable. When I found out that information, I was like, wow, that's amazing. So who are these guys? Who are these guys was my question. And I went back through the history of the American Friends of the Middle East. And it is astounding, because the person who's really heading up the American Friends of the Middle East is a man called Kermit Roosevelt.
Let me stop you, because before we even get to Kermit, because that's going to be a huge part. That's where we're going to get into the Dulles brothers, what the American Friends of the Middle East really is. And, you know, again, it's kind of this CIA conduit group for relations with those that they've alienated via this Israeli-Palestinian conflict that brings Israel in, I guess Israeli, you could say Jewish conflict at the time, or Zionist conflict at the time. That's the way it was being positioned in the media. Before we get there, and I think it's important to talk about the fact that Kissinger, you know, post-1950, I believe it's in 1951, he actually starts a publication over at Harvard, and that's Rockefeller funded. And a lot of this is that globalist Rockefeller ideology starting to come into fruition through these back networks, if you will.
It's always hard to know where to start with this, because they're so interconnected. Those two things are so interconnected. In 1950, Henry Kissinger, he wants to go work for the FBI. He gets nominated to the CFR, but also William Yandell Elliott, who's one of the biggest grandees in American history that nobody's heard about, advisor to 6 different presidents, a weird-looking fella indeed, a really weird-looking fella, and he's Kissinger's mentor. He's one of, along with Fritz Kramer and some other people, he's one of Kissinger's main mentors. He's one of the most important people in his history, and Kissinger even notes in documents to William Yandell Elliott that, you know, everybody says this is Kissinger's international seminar, but we both know the real truth, because it was really Yandell Elliott's international seminar. You know, this was his brainchild, and he saw Kissinger as the person to take this forward. And they needed, of course, support from it. And the magazine that you're talking about is a publication that came up quarterly that ran alongside Kissinger's international seminar, and that was called Confluence. And Confluence magazine ran till about the late 60s, until really the CIA got shown as being the people who were funding all this. And that was funded by the Rockefellers. And it's extraordinary, because when you actually read it, each episode, each publication, each copy edition is filled up with the same sort of speeches you would hear at Davos. There's the same sort of people who are coming forward. And what you realize is Kissinger's international seminar isn't just one thing. It actually is like a 3-phase program. So there's like a young global leaders aspect, but they realize they need to groom these young global leaders. And there's a reason why they need to groom. And that's the other side. That's the reason is that they know that they're going to start enacting coups in different parts of the areas where Soviet control is most likely to have influence.
So let's stop right there for a second, because I think that's important. That's the segue right there, right?
Yeah.
So you're in this state post-World War II where the other world power is the Soviet Union. And I would say that the recruiting point for a lot of these people is you're fighting communism. And all of this is to fight communism. That's the big ideal set. You know, we didn't just bring the Germans in Operation Paperclip style for nothing, guys. We got to fight the Ruskies. And it is in this idea that they're willing to do anything, and the OSS becomes the Central Intelligence Agency. They go to the well, very much so, to the Harvard and Yale establishment for a lot of their acolytes. And while all this is happening, they say, wow, we're going to be cooing these nations. Who are we going to install? We want to install people that have the same ideal set, or at least under our control, and not under this Soviet mindset. So when we're going into Iran, for instance, which you're about to get into, an Operation Ajax, you just don't want to get rid of, I believe it's Mogadishu. You want to have somebody set up after the fact to take over. Take it from there.
Close. It's Mossadegh. It's Mohammed Mossadegh. I also say Mogadishu every now and again. It's slip of the tongue. No. 1952 was the first of these CIA coups. So the course had already started to run. And the first of these CIA coups was, of course, headed up by Kermit Roosevelt. Now, to explain to people who don't really know about the history, the CIA was set up in 1947 out of the remnants of the OSS. And it was the idea was, listen, we need to get serious with creating organizations, influencing organizations like the Soviets do. Because the Soviets, you go back to people like I mentioned, Willy Munzenberg, who since 1918 had been setting up youth organizations all around Europe, who had been influencing the hearts and minds of young people. And it was Lenin who taught this. You know, Lenin, it was out of Lenin's playbook. And the CIA, really, the British, the MI6, and the CIA both kind of come together with this idea, okay, we've got to create loads of organizations post-1945. 1945, you start to see the rollout of all these organizations, and out of this fire comes things like the UN, you know, really big organizations that were there to push this agenda and try and keep control of all of these pieces on the battlefield, because this was an ideological battlefield, a really big ideological, really wide, sprawling ideological battlefield, because the Soviet lines and the Western lines, if you look at where East meets West, it wasn't just East Germany and West Germany. It was the entirety of Europe, all down to the Middle East, all along Africa. And the Soviets were looking to ideologically infiltrate as much of the West as they possibly could, and they had a head start. So the Americans and British went into hyperspeed. They started just setting up as many as they could, and lots of these organizations fell through straight away. You know, they came up against really, really sophisticated Soviet ideology, and they'd fracture and fall apart. And they needed more control over this than they had before. Now, there was a Committee for Peace in the Holy Land, I think it was called, which was what the American Friends of the Middle East was made out of. That was Kermit Roosevelt and Dorothy Thompson. Dorothy Thompson's an interesting figure.
Let's hold up right there. Let's talk about the American Friends of the Middle East, because I think that people don't understand that basically this is an organization that comes out of post the creation of Israel, and in a backlash to the fact that now the Arab League, obviously the Arab world is not happy with what's now occurred. Dorothy Thompson, although you actually highlighted some of her more racist views towards black voters to kind of show what was going on at the time, was also heavily anti-Zionist. Kermit Roosevelt, also heavily anti-Zionist. So there's this faction within this growing military-industrial complex at the top, and even within kind of the presidential sphere, as Franklin Roosevelt was a conduit for this type of thing in the American Friends of the Middle East, where they're setting up an organization where they can at least have talks with these people. But in essence, it's really an organization set up by the CIA to have influence throughout the region.
Yeah, and I mean, it was mind-blowing to find out that all of these organizations were anti-Zionist. I expected it all to be Zionist people straight from the off, you know. We currently live in a paradigm in a world where we see how Zionism won So I thought, oh, well, obviously the CIA must have been on board with that early on. No, nearly every single member of the American Friends of the Middle East were anti-Zionist. Kermit Roosevelt himself had traveled a lot with his father and with Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt, his grandfather, who was, of course, president of the United States.
One of my
His father,
faves.
Kermit Roosevelt was actually Kermit Roosevelt Jr., because Kermit Roosevelt Sr., who committed suicide in Alaska during the war, was also a very interesting figure himself. And he had traveled all around the Middle East, and from a very young age, he had written poetry. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. had written poetry about the Middle East. He loved traveling there. He found the Arabs to be some of the most interesting people. He loved the culture. And a lot of these people were completely devastated by the idea of giving over Palestine to the Zionists, because Zionists, Nahum Goldman and other people were pushing for a new, they were pushing from before the war, from the early 30s, all through the 30s, for a Zionist state in the Middle East. They had their agenda set even before the Holocaust, and they were using the Holocaust. As the Holocaust happened, they were using that as a tool to get their aims
Basically to gain public sentiment around the world to allow this to occur. And one of the criticisms, and one of the criticisms I'd make today, is this allowed for a system where you're taking a religion and all of a sudden you're making it an ethnicity, and you're making it into a racial issue. And because of that, it's remained an extremely hot button issue 7+ decades later, Johnny.
Yeah, and these guys argued. I mean, the American Friends of the Middle East argued openly, publicly, hard, all of them, from Dorothy Thompson, Virginia Gildersleeve, Harry Fosdick, Kermit Roosevelt, all the people at the top of this organization and all of the people within the CIA really were arguing against it. But eventually Truman would recognize in the state of Israel, and of course 1947, 1948 would happen, and the Arabs would be pushed out. They were aiming, the Zionists were aiming to, and they said this out loud all throughout the war, to create a mass migration to the Holy Land, to Palestine, and to push out the Arabs, to make sure that the Jewish people there were the majority. And now that is, you can't even imagine how big a deal or how big an operation that is. But that's what they were pushing for. And of course, Britain had been originally holding that land, running and ruling that land. And they weren't happy about any of this. But the pressure was too much, especially after the war. Colonial Britain was falling apart bit by bit. People were starting to ask questions about oppressors, people who were like Hitler taking over other people's countries. And and 1947 comes along, and all of these organizations start. But the American Friends of the Middle East was a really important invention. It was really important because it was like, okay, the anti-Zionists said, we've got to do something now, and we've got to do it behind the scenes if we're going to have an influence in this region. And we should talk about the first of the coups, which is King Farouk in Egypt. And King Farouk, it was called Operation Fat Fuck. Which is a sprightly name for the first coup that the CIA is going to pull on the world. And they first of all tried to give demands to King Farouk, and King Farouk refused them. And this was headed up by some big people. There was it wasn't only it was Alan Dulles was there as well behind this coup, but this coup was set up, planned by Kermit Roosevelt, who was heading up the American Friends of the Middle East. And it was successful. Before no time whatsoever, they had got the Officers Free Movement, I think it was called, with NASA, and they had got him installed, and Farouk was in exile in Italy, and it was a success. And they realized straight away, we're going to be able to do this all around the place. So John Foster Dulles came along and said, well, I'll give you this a buttload of money. I think it's something like equivalent, if I remember correctly, something like 12 million or something to coup Iran and to overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh, and that was successful as well. The very next year, so they were just starting to implement control, and they were starting to put in their preferred leaders. But the thing is that within just a few years, Egypt would be buying weapons off the Soviet Union and aligning with the Soviet Union because the leaders who were in power were not completely American aligned. They had got what they wanted from the Americans. They had been installed into power, and now they were saying, okay, well, now we're in power. What are you going to do? And what did the Americans do? Well, they set up a course that would allow them to train up future young global leaders who, when they committed coups in the country, when they enacted coups, they could install these leaders into power, and they would definitely be trained, Western aligned. They would have gone through a filtering process, because in a sense, at the very start especially, that's what Kissinger's international seminar was. It was a program where 50 of the best leaders around the world, or potential leaders, sorry, around the world, young guys who had lots of qualifications. They had to be the best. I saw in 1956, 1957 and onwards, they were advertising in the Lahore Military Gazette in Pakistan, where they were saying, you know, exactly what you needed to get into Kissinger's international seminar. And really, they were saying, we'll pay everything. We will pay your, we'll bring you over there. You'll get all your food. Yeah, you'll get everything paid for, but you've got to be the best. And at first it was 50 candidates per session, per seminar, per summer were coming over to be trained. And of course, that would be a process where Kissinger would throw them parties, and they would get to meet all of these different grandees at Harvard, and they would be groomed. It was a grooming process, and it was to find the best leaders. And this wasn't, as you mentioned earlier, Yale really was the start of these like operations, these creation of organizations. There were other people like Britain and Vikings, who I talk about in there, and other
Viking Tom, I believe it is.
Yeah, Tom's Vikings.
Tom's Vikings.
He aimed at Scandinavian areas, so he was looking for Scandinavian leaders, young global leaders, potential young global leaders. And these guys, you know, these organizations were trying to make sure that each of these countries would have definitely American aligned, completely and utterly loyal servants in office, and they did a brilliant job of it.
Well, let me stop you there, because we only got a few more minutes left on the censored version of the broadcast, and then we're going over to RVM Premium. I would argue that you could see the fruits of all this labor over decades and decade and decade with the installation of somebody like Hamid Karzai of Unical during the War of Terror and the Afghanistan conflict very quickly. A lot of people say, oh, well, Afghanistan was a disaster. Yeah, after we brought in the infrastructure that we wanted to for not only the benefit of, say, the oil industries themselves, but of the military-industrial complex, and really beta testing drone warfare, biometrics, and this new mercenary type system that was built out of the War of Terror that now we're seeing utilized in Ukraine, and nobody even whispers about it. Folks, when you see American soldiers on the border as mercenaries, that's because post-war in Afghanistan and Iraq, it wasn't just Blackwater that turned into Academy and XC services. There was a slew of other privatized military groups that are also, in large part, fronts for the Central Intelligence Agency. And all of this is really important because it's not just on the warfare front. It's through things like the American Friends of the Middle East. It's through things like plausible deniability. It's through things like conduits, a.k.a. Henry Kissinger. I had no idea they were connected to the CIA. How would I know? I'm enraged. So here's the deal. We got about a minute left Johnny, and we want to make this transition as smooth as possible. But for the audience that doesn't come over, and by the way, you can listen for free over on Podbean. We might take calls in the last half hour, but Vedmore's so on fire, I don't know that we're gonna. Just telling everybody that right now. Tell people where they can read this article, how they can support your work, and what you've got coming up in the future.
Yeah. Well, I got something good coming up in the future. You can read the article over Unlimited Hangout. I have all my articles on johnnyvedmore.com, where you've got a drop-down menu, and you'll see nearly all of the most important articles there. And it is really important to support my work. I mean, you could, of course, you could support Unlimited Hangout as well. It's such a fantastic platform. Personally, I need support. The article before this took a year to research and find all the information for, and it's not a small a little sort of trek. It's a proper, I have to go real deep. I have to spend days reading book after book after book, paper after paper. It's just really important to support the work. The next article I got out is really the follow-up to this piece, and it will blow people's minds, and it will lead to Ukraine, and it will make people understand what has happened over the past 50 years, and it will be shocking. Some of the information you will hear will make you go, oh my God, it's a takeover, a complete takeover. And it all goes back to this period. It all goes back to this period. And, this is a rolling ball. As I finish one article, another article comes. This is a constant. I'm following a road, and I never know where it's going to lead, but it always leads somewhere.
So let's stop the free one right here, guys. Thumbs it up, subscribe, share. Come on over right now. They're queuing it up over at Red Voice Media. We're going to end the free portion of the broadcast in just a moment because, guys, we need support over here. Johnny Vedmore needs support. These articles don't write themselves. Like I said, this isn't just a puff piece where you're going to be done in 30 minutes. Like, if you're really doing it, it's going to take you 30, 60 to read, and it's going to take you another couple days to actually delve in to the side issues that we're about to get to on the flip. So again, Red Voice Media, the links are